Welcome back, Honors. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flip classroom. And our continuing discussion about Europe following the end of Napoleon. Now, really quickly, though, I can't speak too loud because my wife is next door. She's got a client right now, and I can't be yelling and disrupting what she's doing, all right? Because she's a, dominant business lady, really awesome what she does, and she's got to be able to do a good job on a product, all right? But the big thing about it, though, is I'm going to try and get this posted now and keep it nice and short so y'all have some time to do it. Leading into, I know y'all have challenge practice and like all this other crazy stuff going on, but let's pick up right where we left off in class, right? And where we left off in class is we were talking about how basically while the Industrial Revolution happened and stuff like that during the French Revolution and during the reign of Napoleon, going all the way back into Great Britain, and it eventually will spread into the continent, what we are also going to see, though, as well, is you're going to see a massive bursting forward of new political ideologies and isms and stuff like that that happens following this thing known as the Congress of Vienna. And the Congress of Vienna happened from 1814 to 1815 and was a meeting on how to figure out how to take Europe from looking like this, all controlled by Napoleon, and then instead to looking like this, in what their mind was the balance of power, right? Because as you can see, it increased the land holdings of several very large, dominant kingdoms, including Prussia, Austria, and Russia. Now, Great Britain was involved, but they weren't as necessarily involved as the things going on in the continent because they were having an industrial revolution and making tons of money at the time, so they weren't nearly as worried about it, right? Now, Russia, Austria, and Prussia at the time were considered to be very conservative, all right? So now we have three big isms that we wrote down in our notes that we were leading into this flip, right? We talked about conservatism, and then we have classical liberalism, and then we have socialism, okay? So let's talk about now a little bit more of an in-depth look at these different types of folks, okay? So ism number one, your upper class ism, you're mostly dominated by aristocrats and landholding nobles ism, known as conservatism, okay? Now, key analysis points when we are analyzing these different figures is going to be do they believe should be in charge of the government? What do they believe the economy should look like? How do they feel about constitutions? And what do they view on when it comes to voting in governmental systems, right? Now, really quickly, just a vocab term that you're going to need to know going forward into what we're talking about, that you'll also need to know on your for your test, because it's definitely going to be a fill-in-the-blank question, because it's yet again another one of those words that you're not super comfortable with. So Mr. Terry likes to force you to remember it, okay? So the word is suffrage, right? Suffrage is what we use to refer to the process of voting. That's why in the early 1900s, whenever we're seeing a suffrage movement of women happen, leading up to the 19th Amendment, we refer to that as the women's suffrage movement, right? So that's, of course, these key analysis points that we're looking at. Now, going into it, we'll also talk about some key figures in each of these isms, but we'll get to that towards the end of each slide, okay? So first of all, when we're looking at conservatives in Europe, we have to understand that, again, they are mostly inhabited, or this class is almost completely inhabited by upper-class land-holding nobility, right? And who do those people believe should be in power? None other than the absolutists that were, of course, in power before Napoleon and before the French Revolution in the first place. The thing they also believe about the economy, which all absolutists believed about the economy, is they believed in mercantilism, right? They believed in that really aggressive, direct government intervention of the economy from an absolutist standpoint, telling countries they could or could not trade with certain other countries, focusing on exporting more than you import, and then also as well trying to grow as much gold, silver, and monetary value within their country, right? But again, it's that direct government intervention is going to be a very key important point. Now, constitutions, how do they feel about those things? Well, we talked about this in class. They hate them, right? They don't like the ideas of constitutions, because what does a constitution do to an absolute monarch? Nothing but limit their power, right? Constitutions give rights to people, and it also tells them that they have certain freedoms, right? So, of course, they're going to really hate and despise those things. Now, some of you are like, but Mr. Terry, but the Magna Carta in England is going to be really important, and that's a constitution, and they had one, but were they conservative? They're a little bit of an oddball, right? England's a little bit of a kind of asterisk to this entire system, because their conservatives still believed in a constitutional monarchy, right? But a lot of that has to do with the fact that they've had one since 1215. So going into the next one, also voting, how do they feel about suffrage? They hate it, all right? They do not like the idea of people being able to vote. They believe that only the landholding nobility should have a say in the government, right? Now, keep in mind, all right, keep this in the back of your mind, that these people, these conservatives, these land-holding nobles were still in power of all of these places, including Prussia, Russia, Austria, also as well as France is going to be a big one, because actually they're going to restore the Bourbon monarchy following the Congress of Vienna, and the new king would come back into France named Louis the 18th. Some of you are like, how do we go from Louis the 16th to the 18th? We'll get to all that stuff a little bit later on. But keep that in mind, that these conservatives are still very much in power throughout all of Europe in places after the French Revolution and Napoleon, which some of you are like, man, that French Revolution sure did kill a lot of people and sure did bring some jerk to power named Napoleon to do a lot of nothing, and for them to just end up with a king all over again. And right there, you would be right. And a lot of that has to do because conservatives prevailed at the Congress of Vienna. Now, important figures that you need to remember when you're talking about conservatives is people like Clemens von Metternich, right? Clemens von Metternich is this guy right here who is one of the princes of Austria, and he is going to be basically your conservative superhero. He actually ran the entirety of the Congress of Vienna, and he did that through a conservative lens, right? And he wanted to restore the absolute monarchs, and he thought that by doing this, it would bring about peace and make sure no revolutions ever happened ever again. And ironically enough, the years from 1815 to 1848 are known as the Age of Metternich, right? They're referred to as the Age of Metternich because, yes, no war broke out in Europe between these massive powers and between these balanced powers now back in Europe. No one fought against each other, but what we need to understand is there was a lot of repression, right? When poor people in their countries, inside of Prussia, inside of Russia, inside of Austria, inside of France, inside of Great Britain, when they started, getting scrappy and wanting to have protests for more rights, you know what conservatives would do? They would typically come in and crush these revolts, right? Leading to a lot of hardship, violence, and sometimes even death, right? So now the second ism that we now need to talk about is known as classical liberalism, right? And we'll talk about several figures associated with this as well. Now, the reason why we have to have classical in front of it is because liberals from the 1800s are not like liberals today. Liberals from the 1800s are actually more close to conservatives of the modern era. Now, when we look at the classical liberals, we have to understand first and foremost, who are they? They are mostly your middle class, right? They are your business owners. They are your upstarts. They are your people that have taken risks, that have invested in this new economy, and they're beginning to make money, right? The classical liberals, though, who do they want to be in power? They want a combination of government, right? They want a limited monarch, maybe, but with no possible exception, they demand a legislative body, right? Now, legislative body, I mean, they want things like the Parliament or the National Assembly or the Congress in America, right? They believe that a legislative body that is made up and represents the people and is considered what you would refer to as a direct democracy is crucial to government to making sure that the demands of the people are heard and met, right? They're fine with a limited monarch. They're okay with kings and queens and stuff like that as long as there is a constitution in place, right? But we'll get to that here in about 2 seconds. Now, their economy that they believe in is a free market economy, right? They believe in what is now being defined by Adam Smith as capitalism, right? They believe in capitalism. They believe that the economy should be allowed to flow and move and do whatever it wants, right? What they truly believe in their free market capitalistic economies is this thing known as laissez-faire economics. Do me a favor, write that word down. It's definitely going to be in your fill in the blank. Laissez-faire is spelled Laissez hyphen F-A-I-R-E, laissez-faire. And what that means is when the government does not tamper with the economy, right? So what you have to understand is that the classical liberals hated the mercantilistic system that conservatives believed in. They didn't like it at all because they thought that the government tampering with the economy only held it down. They believed in laissez-faire economics instead, where the government kept their mitts off, right? And they believed that the government should only tax enough to provide for a common defense and provide for common community like goods, right? So going forward as well, though, constitutions, how do classical liberals feel about them? They love them, right? Classical liberals love constitutions because they love knowing exactly what their rights are and when they get met, right? Now, the next one as well is the voting, okay? Voting, they like it, but they don't like it for everybody, all right? They want limited amounts of voting. They want the middle class to have voting expanded to them, but they don't want the poor to be able to vote. Because there's a lot of famous figures that are actually classical liberals throughout history that is very, very interesting because they actually had very, very convoluted views on voting. For example, Benjamin Franklin believed that literally poor people voting was like a bunch of sheep deciding what wolf would eat them. Which is surprising, right? That's insane. Everyone should be allowed to vote. So going into it, though, you have to understand they believe that people that were poor would vote with their stomachs, not with their brains, all right? That is a very, very common thing that they would say all the time. Their buzzwords as well. Now, notice I don't have a lot of buzzwords for conservatives because we've talked about them all this time. Because when you really look at European history in general, the way we've been working with it, we've been talking about conservatives this entire time, right? But the buzzwords for classical liberals are individualism and competition, right? Things that they believe in. Classical liberals, which is now more closely associated with modern day conservatives. Individualism, it means that they believe in the dog eat dog world of certain economic systems where they believe that everybody will rise and fall of their own volition and that hard work will be rewarded. They also believe in competition. They think that competition makes the best products and the best people, right? So those are some big buzzwords you need to know for them. Now, there are several figures that are also associated with classical liberalism, including John Locke, who is this guy right here, who of course wrote the 2 Treatises on Government and believed in natural and inalienable rights from the Enlightenment. Another Enlightenment thinker that is considered a classical liberal is Adam Smith of Scotland, who wrote The Wealth of Nations, who actually is the very first one to really define what a free market system is. And then, of course, our guy from the French Revolution, the Marquis de Lafayette, would be a very good example of a classical liberal during this time period, right? Now, going forward as well, now we have the scary one, the one that freaks people out so much, and it's really silly that it freaks them out. We have none other than socialism, right? Socialism is going to be a big one that pops up right after the French Revolution as well, and what we need to understand about them is who they are. They are mostly made up of the poorer working populations, or people who advocate for them, right? Somebody who might be in the middle class or upper class that advocates for the working people, they are typically socialists during the 1800s, right? Now, going into it, though, what you have to understand is that who do they believe should be in charge? They believe that the government should be led by a pure republic, right? A legislative body, no monarchs at all involved whatsoever. They believe that people should be allowed to vote on these different items and that they should have a say in their government and in the laws that are going to be coming up, right? For example, a Republican element that actually existed inside of Louisiana this past weekend was voting on the constitutional amendments, right? That is an element of a republic because America has what is known as a democratic republic, and they believe, the socialists believe, but that should be a direct republic, right? Pure legislative body republic where Congress leads and there's no executive and no figureheads or hierarchy, but just a system where people can voice their opinion into the government, right? This is all part of that concept called the general will that was done by Jean-Jacques Rousseau that we'll talk about here in about 2 seconds again, okay? Now, their economy, what do they believe in an economy? They believe that the free market economy or a capital economy will simply grind the workers down and keep them in a rigged economic system that will keep poor people poor intentionally, because that is what is necessary to keep products and goods cheap, but to keep a free market capitalistic system going. So they believe in what's known as a planned economy, right? Socialists believe that certain goods should have price limits on them, right? For example, bread, right? As we've talked about bread so often in this class, they believe bread should have a price cap on it, right? Constitutions, how do they feel about those? They love them because they feel as though they directly limit the power of the wealthy, but they have to be regulated. They believe the constitutions should be directly aimed at making sure that the playing field is even for all people. Now, voting, what voting procedures do they believe in? They believe in universal suffrage, all right? Keep this in the back of your mind. Universal suffrage, which means they believe everyone should be allowed to vote, and their big buzzwords are the following things. They believe in utopian communities. They believe that there's this idea that you could set forth and possibly try to create communities of small numbers of people that are actually insulated and have their own economic systems, and that socialism will only be able to be accomplished with small utopian communities, but we'll talk about those in class a little bit. They also believe, like I said, in the general will, which is a concept created by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. They also believe in the redistribution of wealth. No, I have this in all capital letters, okay? They believe that people at the top of society are hoarding too much wealth and that it needs to be redistributed throughout the economy. A good example of this would be like, let's say hypothetically, I'm the factory owner and y'all are my workers. I get to keep 51% of the profits. 49% of the profits is meant to go to y'all, in the sense of like, y'all worked for it. You made the products that I sold and made a lot of money off, so you should get some share of the profit, right? That's an element of the redistribution of wealth, making sure that workers have a buy-in into the economic system, right? They also believe that there should be regulation of the means of production. And what I mean by that, regulation of the means of production, is making sure that no business owner is taking advantage of its worker and its people, right? So going into it, 3 big guys that are very important socialists during this time period is one, you could argue, is Jean-Jacques Rousseau as a proto-socialist that came out before the French Revolution that began to advocate for a lot of these early ideas like the general will. A lot of historians are beginning to look back on him and be like, oh, he kind of was socialist before socialism was a thing. And then also you have another one named Henri de Saint-Simon, who actually said that there are 2 types of people in society. There are parasites and there are doers, right? Doers are people like doctors and academics and the well-educated who should actually use their gifts to benefit the people of society and learn how to fix things just for the sake of fixing them, and that society will uphold those people. But then there are people like parasites, which are like business owners and politicians and lawyers that he believes are actually there just to harvest goods and things away from workers, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit more in class as well, but the most prominent socialist that pops up during the 1800s is a man by the name of Karl Marx, right? And you need to highlight his name, star it, circle it 100 times, because he's going to invent something special. He's going to come up with this thing called communism, right? Because he believes that socialism doesn't go far enough, and he believes that purely in the idea of a violent overthrow of the wealthy is the only true way to go. And when he looks back at socialism, he started as a socialist, but he eventually would go towards communism because he thought socialism just wasn't quite enough, all right? But we will talk about the rest of that stuff in class when we review all this. We have a little bit of stuff that we have to talk about in class tomorrow. We've got to talk about the Haitian Revolution a little bit, and then we're going to get into the revolutions of 1848, the Hungry 40s, all this other big stuff, but we'll talk about all that stuff when I see y'all tomorrow, all right? Y'all have a good one.